Katy Goshtaspi. Welcome to the Katy G podcast. And the mission of my podcast is for us to realize that we're all really great. We can even be greater. And most importantly, how can we bring this greatness to the world through a brand? And why this podcast? There's two reasons. I care about humanity deeply, and I want us all to really see how great we are, to be happier. And because I am human too, just like you, the listener, I struggle with my own feelings of being less than, just like everyone else. And so some days are ugly and other days are great. So this is the first of my Women in Law podcast, Women Lawyers podcast series, as a subpart of my Katy G podcast. And I wanted Elise to be the first one that I interviewed, and I'm going to introduce her here in a second, because Elise Buie, and I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, Elise?
Yeah, you sure are. You did a great job with all those vowels.
Thank you. Elise and I were catching up the other day, and she was telling me about all the brilliant things she's doing since the pandemic started. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, this flashlight went off in my head and said, other women lawyers must hear this for inspiration and to learn and to be able to do this, because we need great women lawyers out there doing what Elise is doing. And I know you, the listener, are one of them. Sometimes we just need to hear it from somebody else and their version of it. So not so we can replicate it and not be authentic, because we always say authentic brands win, but because it helps to get inspired, to have creativity flowing, to get imagination going, and just learn from one another. That's what we women are very good at. And support is important. And as women lawyers, I find that we don't have time for that necessarily. So, if you can give us 15 to 30 minutes, I promise I'll make it worthwhile. And I want to thank Elise for joining me. Elise Buie runs a fantastic, and I truly mean that, because you just got to get on her website and check it out, family law firm. All women, and her story is amazing. I'm going to let her tell you her story, but if you just get on the About page for her website, and I'll let her give you all those details at the end, you will see her story of moving and dealing with Mother Nature and having to move from one part of the country to another part of the country. And I think that's inspiring in and of its own, to take what Hurricane Katrina did in New Orleans and evacuating a whole family. It sounds dramatic. It's not meant to be, but maybe there was a lot of dramatic nature, and I'll let her talk to you about that herself. But the point is that she has done a lot, and her firm is flourishing as a result. So welcome, Elise. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you taking the time, because I know you, like the rest of our listeners, are a busy mom. And I'll let you tell them how many kids you've got going on and how you're handling that. And you run a very successful firm. So to make time for this means a lot, and I'm honored by it. And I'm sure everyone listening is as well.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I love being able to talk to you today.
My pleasure. So tell me a little bit about your background. I don't think I did it justice. It always sounds so much better coming from the actual person. And I call that, Elise is learning what I do. And so I call that your personal story. And I think everyone's personal story is fascinating, even though most of my clients are like, my story's not interesting. And I'm like, it sure is. Let me be the judge of that. So tell us a little bit about your personal story and let us be the judge of that.
Okay, sure. We would need way more time than we probably have, though, to get through all the gory details. But we will, sum it up with, I am from New Orleans, lived in New Orleans my entire life, started practicing law in New Orleans, clerked for a federal judge, went into a big law firm, and then decided all of a sudden I was not getting to see my children enough. And at that time, I think I just had 2 children. So that was the early days. And so I quit my job. I decided to stay home with my children and raise them. And I think immediately, within a week of quitting my job, I found out I was pregnant with number 3. Then number 4 came. And then with that, all of a sudden, Hurricane Katrina came. And so there we are in New Orleans in 2005. And I have to back up a few weeks. So 3 weeks prior to Hurricane Katrina, one of my very best friends was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. And she has 6 children. She was divorced and, raising these children, and was diagnosed and told, she was going to live about a month. And so it was pretty dramatic, to say the least. And so I went in, full mode, helping my friend, taking care of her kids, bringing her to chemo. I mean, just the whole 9 yards. I mean, I was on the scene doing all the things a person could come up with to do for somebody who's going through this. And then Hurricane Katrina hit. And at the moment that the hurricane was coming to New Orleans, I was in the ICU with my friend who had had this big dramatic event happen at chemo. I won't get into that, but suffice it to say, it should have been a Hallmark movie. So there I am sitting in the ICU. My ex-husband, but at the time he was my husband, he called me and said, "We need to evacuate." I was like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "There is a storm coming and we need to evacuate." I was like, "David, I've lived in New Orleans my entire life. I have never evacuated. I don't even know what that means. Like, we stay here through storms. Like, they come and go, not a big deal." He's like, "Elise, this is a real big deal. You need to get on the news at the nurse's desk or something, because we need to evacuate, and I need to pack up all the kids and we need to evacuate." And I was like, I really thought I don't know what I thought he was doing. But I told him, I was like, "Okay, pack 2 of everything for all the kids, 2 shorts, 2 t-shirts, 2 PJs, 2 swimsuits." I'm like, "Just pack 2 of everything and I'll be home and we'll evacuate." And so in trying to deal with her family as well, figure all that out, we evacuate from New Orleans and show up at his parents' house in Georgia, which is kind of comical because not only were they not expecting us, they weren't all that enthusiastic about the arrival. But, what do? You just kind of do the best you can. So we ended up in Georgia. Long story short, she ended up leaving the hospital against medical advice. She woke up, the whole city had been evacuated, the hurricane had hit, all this craziness. I ended up flying to Houston. We had to get her kids all settled there in Houston. Just lots of stuff. We then stayed in Georgia for several years. No, for 1 full year. Then we decided we needed to move. And so my family and I moved to Minnesota. And then we ended up moving to Seattle, but that was another 5 years later. My husband and I were in the process of going through a divorce at the time all this is happening. So obviously we had to kind of put that on hold as all this chaos was going on in our life. We just kind of put our noses down, did what we could to keep our kids as stable as possible. And so then once we decided we actually could divorce, things were fine. Everyone was stable. After 5 years in Minnesota, we divorced. Then the kids and I actually moved to Seattle. That's a whole nother story. But I got remarried to somebody our families had known for a long time. And so he and his 2 girls lived in Seattle. So my children were younger. So we moved out here to Seattle. Then my ex has also moved out here to Seattle. So we're all here in Seattle now. And then I had to retake the bar again, for the 3rd time. I had taken it in Minnesota. When we got to Minnesota, then I had to take it here in Seattle. And so I did that and then I worked for a year for another firm and then started my own firm in 2015.
2015. Okay. Got it.
Yep. So for 5 years, we have been plugging along and growing and, doing here. And my children have been, finished up high school here. We just have one. So between the 2 of us, we have 6 kids and we just have the one left at home. So I have a child who'll be a senior this fall here in Seattle. And obviously that's its own interesting thing in pandemic times.
That's exciting. Congratulations. 5 down to go.
Oh, you just don't even know. It's huge.
I have no idea, but I can imagine. It's so interesting loving somebody, but wanting to be a little further away from them so you can keep loving them, I think is the way it works. Plus, you want everyone to be free and have their own independence and be able to produce. And so you just said so much for us to unpack right there. And I'm guessing everyone in the audience can identify with at least one, if not a lot of your story. And again, everyone should know their story because these stories are fascinating, right? It's always one of resilience, whatever you want to look at it. I'm an immigrant, so my story is very different than yours, but it is about relocation and resiliency. And really, it sounds like having faith and doing the right thing, not just by you, but by everyone else. And I think you said so many important things. Not the biggest one, but the one that stood out was that women are so good at giving other women support. And the fact that you were in the ICU and then later when she was relocating with your friend. And a lot of people, a lot of women say, well, they become very humble and they say, well, that's just what you do, right? Yes, we hope that's what everyone agrees with and that's what everyone does. And I wonder if the pandemic has taught us that. I was telling my husband yesterday, who's a dentist here in San Diego, I was helping him out in his office because, we've got to deal with a crisis over there too in terms of coming back and staff not wanting to come back and whatnot. And I said, everyone I call, I haven't been in this office in 10 years, but everyone I call is so nice these days. Everyone's stepping up and wanting to help. And I think that's just the temperament. So for you, your portion of the story, it's fascinating to me how, things change and life changes. And as women, we're very good at being truly head of household and managing that. And then on top of that, being a professional. 3 bar exams is no joke. I've taken 3 bar exams too. That in and of itself takes my breath away, Elise, if nothing else, it was 6 children. So tell me, before we go into the concept of how you deal best with a crisis, and then we'll talk about the pandemic after that. Why did you decide to go into family law? And what is it that you love best about what you do now?
Well, I think family law for me was such a natural fit as I was looking, to get a divorce. I mean, and there I am with 4 children. And at the time, I'm helping this friend who also has been divorced and her 6 children. And it is becoming quite obvious to me how important it is for people to get along because the amount of coordination that was required for me and my friend and her ex-husband, to coordinate the care and everything that went into that. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you. I mean, and her ex-husband and I stood together at the hospital when she was diagnosed with the cancer. And so there we were, and he's an emergency room doctor, and he's being told that his ex-wife has this, terminal illness. And watching him go through everything he went through and being there for him and for my friend was really eye-opening to me. And I think at that moment, it became clear to me how important it was that no matter how my ex, who was my current husband at the time, no matter how we felt in our spouse brains, we had like children to care for. We had business that we created that we needed to take care of. And to do that in a way that was constructive and where we could help our children move forward successfully, I mean, that became kind of the driving force of everything I did thereafter.
And that is such a great example. So thank you for being my best example. I always tell everyone when they put me on a panel at these conferences, I say, I can teach the lesson, but I'd like a lawyer or a professional who has accomplished it so I can let them speak so people can see that it is truly possible. So to your point, I always tell all the women lawyers, I'm like, please have a good reason for doing what you do. And it's always tied to our stories. And women always say to me, well, that's a silly thing to tell people. I don't want to talk about, for instance, my divorce, or I don't want to talk about that. And I'm like, well, how would we otherwise connect with you and know your heart's in it and that thus you're going to deliver results? I mean, the assumption is you're good at what you do. At least I can just tell you're good at what you do. But the point is, I want to know why and what drives you. And running a business is not easy, as you can attest. I fully believe that. There are days, right? There are days where what keeps me going and all the nonsense dealing with bookkeeping and this and that. And I farm everything out, right? But still, you're always having to make sure everything runs smoothly. And so there are days where what keeps me going is why I do what I do and the love of what I do. And so that's exactly why everyone needs a story like Elise's. We don't want Elise's story because it's not authentic, but it says so much about how we succeed. And then we want to share that story like she's doing because it matters. It matters to your audience because it makes people feel like they can be confident in your skill set. And people are always like, what does my story have to do with my skill set? Everything and nothing. So nothing in brand development, ladies, has to do with the left linear analytical brain. And Elise is a really good example of that. She's not talking about what she's doing substantively. She's talking about why she's good at it because of her story that drives results. And that's the beautiful part. So everyone needs a story, some version of why you became a lawyer. And if you think your story is not a good one, think twice. It must be, and it doesn't matter what it is as long as you're honest about it. So tell me, Elise, how would you summarize the fact that you deal best with a crisis? Or how do you deal best with crises, whether it's hurricanes or pandemics? And then later, part two of that really is, can you tell me after you've answered that one, how have you best weathered this pandemic personally and in the firm?
Well, I would say my ability to deal with crisis revolves around kind of two separate things. I first go into, which is probably no doubt my kind of reptilian fear brain, where I wrap my head around the very worst case scenario of what could happen because of whatever we're dealing with. And I figure out how I can weather that very worst case scenario. And it's a very intentional thing I do. I mean, like with this pandemic in particular, I mean, way before the rest of the country was thinking about the pandemic. I mean, we here in Seattle, we were at the epicenter initially. My child got exposed before the first death even occurred. So, I mean, I was literally on the phone with a public health nurse before the rest of the state knew that we even had a COVID death. So I got a little jump start on this. And so I literally pulled out this massive whiteboard that I have, and I started mapping out fiscally, how was my firm going to handle it if we got 0 phone calls for 6 months? And I literally fiscally mapped out all these different scenarios of how this would work. I would not take a salary. I sat my husband down and I'm like, we need to figure out how to get rid of $250,000 in expenses, by tomorrow. And he was like, whoa, what are we talking about? And I was like, we've got to do the massive shrink. We need to figure it out because I need to figure out how to save my staff. And I was like, we can weather this, but my entire staff cannot. I have some single women with children and, people in other, they're younger and they're struggling. And I was like, I have to figure out how I can keep paying them. And obviously this is way before any talk of loans or PPP or whatever. And so it didn't even occur to me there would be quote unquote help from anybody. So right. I was just in this very, primitive, like, let me figure this out. So I went through that exercise with my 17-year-old watching me, and he's looking over my whiteboards and he's like, Mom, why do you move that lever? Why don't you, do something here? And that could affect this. It was kind of an interesting exercise, for him to see how decisions are made and just how you deal with something like this. And then after I went through all the scenarios, I literally just almost had a revelation, kind of like this aha moment of, I was like, I got this. I could shrink down, to this bare minimum. I can shrink our family expenses down. And I said, I've got this. I'm going to put my nose down. I am going to become like the marketing queen. I'm going to not let the phone stop ringing for 6 months. And I wrote this pretty heartfelt letter to my team. And I was like, we have built this firm, over 7 figures together, and we're going to keep it that way. And if we can't, we're going to go down together. Like, I am not going to let anybody go, and we will figure this out. And I think at that moment, then I put on my growth mindset, like, how can I take what's going on and use it to my advantage. And if that meant we had less cases, what could I do internally in my firm to make the firm better so that it was positioned to come out of the pandemic even stronger? And so I thought we were going to be doing all this like internal systems work and, all this like back scene work. And that's what I prepared my whole team to be doing. I had kind of figured out who would be doing what and everything. And we literally have just been blowing and going with calls. And so we have been, bringing in cases. I mean, we had our best month ever in March. Then we had our next best month in April. Then we had our next best month in May. Like, it's literally just been this, we've been growing. And so, I mean, I've hired 4 people since March 1st. I actually just brought on another person yesterday. So 5 people now.
So how many do you have in total now?
Oh gosh. I think I counted the other day. I mean, between full-time employees and contractors, I think we have 16 people.
Wow. That is, I get so emotional when I hear your story. It's just so moving because it is so productive, but it also has a healthy dose of kindness, right? And so if I had to sum up how you deal best with crisis, and this is really so people can learn, every woman lawyer listening to this, please take this and adapt it for yourself. Elise is not saying that she didn't get scared. The reptilian brain has fear in it. But once she acknowledged the fear, and Elise, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just summarizing so we can distill the learning so everyone can walk away with it, plus your beautiful story, is that she acknowledged the fear and then said, look, I am strong, I am capable. Shifted the mindset. Everything starts in our heads. We develop a plan in our head and we execute it. So I always say, do you have an intentional branding plan? Do you have that mindset that shifts from fear to love, really? Because look, it's a spectrum of emotions. And I'm going to talk to Elise about emotions here in a minute. There's fear and there's love. And where are you? Love does not mean romantic love in business. That does not belong in business. We all know that. But it means caring and kindness. So she shifted gears and said, I care about my staff. And I know everyone listening here fully gets that because as women, we are good at caretaking. We are the mothers and the nurturers of the world. And yet sometimes it doesn't always jive well, and it contradicts, in our minds at least, being an effective and efficient lawyer and producing results. So I wanted Elise to tell her story because you can see how you can combine those two, and it's not a paradigm, and there is no conflict there, that you can have fear but shift gears and say, I acknowledge it, I'm not denying it, I'm just going to strip it away and go into action to produce results so that it comes across with caring and love, because I do care about my staff and my job and my family. And I think if we all dealt with crisis at any level that way, we would all be way ahead of the game, because every one of you listening can produce the results Elise produced. Nothing taking away from Elise's productivity and abilities, but we all have this ability. So you said you increased your business during the pandemic. How exactly did you do that? Can you give us like a 3-minute version of what you did? Because I think you enunciated it really well when we talked about it, and I thought it was fantastic.
Well, I think for me, one of the big things has been, I started doing the consults that we had. Before the pandemic, other people in the firm were doing the consults, and it occurred to me that, I should do the consults. And it also occurred to me that as part of doing the consults, I could offer things to people during this time that I might not offer in a regular time. You know how we often do consults and there's a lot of discussion around, not giving legal advice and, just kind of selling your service and moving forward. But during this time, I was able to really provide a lot of resources to people. So not so much legal advice, but expertise advice on, co-parenting things or neutral financial professionals, or, I mean, all kinds of things. I mean, I have to tell you, as a past homeschool mom, my homeschool knowledge has come in quite handy. And so, in raising and homeschooling many children onto college, there's some expertise there where people are like, oh, well, here's somebody who was able to do that. And so I have connected with our consults in a way that is been really interesting. And I mean, the conversion on the consults, has been remarkable. But I think it is those connections that have made all the difference. And I think also the fact that we were a virtual firm prior to this pandemic, we did not have to make any adjustments from a technology standpoint. We were all up and running in home offices. And we just continue that. And everybody I've onboarded, they come on, they have their own home office. We have to now onboard a little differently because we're not doing anything face to face. So, I mean, I've hired people that I have never met in person.
I love it. So for all of you listening, don't go there in your head. Don't say, see, she had a leg up. They were already virtual. Don't do that. Yes, she did have that advantage. However, that's not why she was successful, okay? It's a part of it, but the question has now become for every one of us to consider, every law firm, how are you going to go virtual if that's the goal? And this is how Elise and I know each other. We both know the company Clio, and I'm sure a lot of listeners are already Clio users. And so if you have that back end set up, I love Clio, and Elise is a big fan of Clio. And when Jack Newton, the founder of Clio, CEO of Clio, interviewed me for his podcast, that was one of the questions he said. He said, what should lawyers be doing differently during the pandemic? And I said exactly what Elise has been doing, just reaching out to clients and putting on your creativity. And most lawyers tell me, oh, I'm not creative. And I say, you are. You're just stifling it with your left linear analytical brain, which is what we use every day to do our job. But stopping at creative and think, what services can I offer my clients? And this is true now, too. The times have changed. Nothing is different from 6 weeks ago when I did that interview, or when Elise kicked into the consult role really being different. What do you know about? Like, she knew about homeschooling, different things. How can you be of value to your clients? I want each and every one of you to never lose this mentality from the pandemic. That is a huge silver lining blessing, that you're always thinking, how can I truly bring value to my clients? How can I make sure they know I care? And my biggest advice was just to pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, how are you doing? How's your family doing? And see what questions they have for you that might be out of the realm of your practice. Family law is one area, but she could probably be of value to people in ways that she never thought of. And then they're your biggest fans for good reason, right? And then they depend on you and they count on you. And it's a community we're in, folks. And look, women lawyers, we're good at establishing community. We're good at being leaders. This is not to say anything negative about male lawyers. And I hope the male lawyers who are smart enough to listen to this podcast really get that this is not a slam against you. It's just identifying what we're good at, what our natural strengths are, and capitalizing on them. And Elise is giving some fantastic examples of that. And I want that for all of you. And using the software tools that are out there. The reason I talk about Clio so much is because they're very good at what they do. And they're a good example of a company that's doing exactly what Elise is doing. They care, they take care of people, and they grow systematically. Is it impossible to have grown in March, April, or May? Not at all. My business did as well. And so we're not rubbing it in anybody's face. We're just saying it's possible and you can do that. You just can't go off kilter into emotions and not handle your emotions well. And that's the last thing I want to talk to Elise about. One of the big things that I say effective brands do is handle emotions well. In fact, I have and trademarked the phrase emotional resonance factor. It's a program that I teach. And as women lawyers, though, we often struggle with our emotions and whether we should incorporate them into business and manage our emotions well to grow myself and my law practice. And so, Elise, tell me, how do you effectively handle emotions for your staff, for yourself through all of this? And the reason I ask that is because everything tied to business through crisis, through pandemic, through any change is emotional. If you don't believe me as the listener, look at what's going on in the stock market. They said that the unemployment rate had gone down, and so everyone got all excited. That's emotions, and the stock market went up. And then they said, oops, the Bureau of Labor Statistics had missed, the math was done incorrectly, and actually unemployment has gone up. So then emotions tanked, and that impacted the market. So emotions are tied to who we are, and who we are is tied to how we sell and grow our practice. So, Elise, what do you do? How do you handle the emotions of yourself and your staff well in order to be so successful?
I think one thing I do is, I tend to think of myself as pretty emotionally intelligent, to really be able to read people well and read myself well. And, but I really do lean into emotions a lot. Like I don't shy away from them. And so, if my team is upset or my team is overwhelmed or stressed, I'm going to change gears. This is just coming to me. We had a meeting scheduled recently, and I actually wanted to talk to them about some metrics and some things that I wanted to talk to them about. And it was clear that that was not going to be a good idea. They were really, struggling with a lot of things that are going on with the protests and things that were happening. And so I completely changed gears, and we had a meeting solely to discuss our feelings and really talk about how everybody was actually doing, like hardcore, how are they doing? We had many people crying, it was a very emotional meeting. And as part of that, I had my admin team, I reached out, I wanted books for all of us to read. We're all going to read a certain book together and discuss some of this so that we can just talk about how can we as a firm have a role in moving the needle on the things where the needle needs to be moved. And I think allowing that and allowing my team to process things and being willing to pivot and, not be tone deaf myself and stuck in some, I'm going to discuss some, metric with them where they're all, in a place that they really needed to be able to share and be in community with each other. And I think for the pandemic itself, my team did not get to see me in my fear brain where I was going through all these scenarios. But when I wrote my big letter to my team and then sat down with them all virtually, I showed them, I had pictures of all the different scenarios because I wanted them to understand how scared I really was. So they didn't have some idea that I was coming at them with, almost like magical thinking. Like I wanted them to understand that, I had gone through 42 fiscal scenarios. Like I understood our numbers. I knew exactly what levers needed to be pulled. I knew what was going to work, what wasn't going to work. I knew our least, what was the least billable amount we needed to make to make the bills. I knew everything about the numbers. And so I think by sharing that really vulnerably, like letting them know how scared I was and how much I, thought about, their finances, my finances, them understanding that I was having conversations like, do I not send my child to private school his senior year? And do I keep my admin person? That's like where I was at.
Wow.
What things am I going to exchange for this? And so I think with that helps my team. So through their own emotions, they're able to look to me and say, okay, at least they think she's thinking about things, she's thinking about us. And I think that brings them down. I mean, I often think of my staff, we work in a stressful business. And sometimes I think of them like cats, you get your fur all up and things are stressful. And I always think of myself as like, okay, I come in and try to make everything more chill and like, let's, bring it down a notch and figure out, really break down problems. I mean, my children would say it's a negative side of me. So to be fair to them, they say I become absolutely robotic in a crisis. Like everything I do just gets brought down. My heart rate slows down. I talk slower. I talk quieter. And I'm just like, okay, we're dealing with a crisis. This is the first thing we need to do.
Right? You're managing the crisis situation. That comes from a practical perspective that has to happen. Otherwise, your emotions go off the rail and you panic, which doesn't help anything, right?
Exactly. And I am the absolute cool under pressure person. I become as cool as a cucumber. I mean, the crazier things are around me, the calmer I become. And so I do think that helps in a crisis when other people are looking to you to lead them, because I'm not going to be the one that's stirring any more stuff up. And so I'm able to bring things down. And I think that helps, my team. And I think it helps my children too, despite their comments that I can be robotic. But
so it sounds like, to summarize what you're saying for the rest of us, that really it's a harmony. I always call it a harmony instead of balance, because balance makes me feel like I'm going to fall off that type of stresses me out even more. Harmony of being pragmatic and being like most mothers are. You've got a choking child. You're not going to run around and cry. You're going to spring into action, and
totally.
the strength shows up, and you just handle it, and you go into gear and save your child. You save your business. You save your employees with a plan. It's married, though, in a harmonious way with the emotions of, I'm not going to become so emotional that I can't be an inspirational leader and support you guys. So I'm not going to, if I melt down, there's no one to follow. However, I'm going to be real, as Brene Brown and all her research, which most of you probably are familiar with, shows. Vulnerability is so important. And this isn't just about women, right, Elise? I mean, if we had men that were on staff and working with you and for you, we're all human. And I always say, bring your human to work. As a brand, do not forget that we're all human, and we put our pants and our skirts on one shoe at a time, one leg at a time, one stiletto at a time, whatever you want to call it. But we all have to keep that perspective. And if we don't share what's in our hearts and what's also the numbers look like, then people feel excluded and they don't feel valued, and they feel like they can't trust you as an employer, as a lawyer, because they can't read you and they don't feel safe. And that sense of safety in any crisis situation is critically important, but especially in what we're dealing with now.
I think it's key. Yes. I mean, your team has to be able to trust that you are moving in the right direction and that you do have their best interests at heart. Absolutely. And I think that is so important. I mean, and I kind of operate under a mindset of radical candor. I mean, I tend to be very blunt, but I mean, not in any kind of mean way. I mean, but I'm not that person that's going to hide the ball or hide something. I mean, I am going to be very blunt. My team is going to know what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling. And if we have a problem or some situation, I mean, I'm going to put the problem right out there in the front on the table so we all can look at it and turn it around like a Rubik's Cube and try to solve it. I mean, I'm not, let's hide the ball at all. I mean, I think a lot of times the more brains we have working on a problem, the better. And I just think with radical candor, so many solutions can be found if we can communicate in a way that's respectful yet very honest.
And that is saying a lot. I think sometimes the way you say it, it's we all on this podcast are like, well, of course that's what you do. However, it's easier said than done, and simple is not always easy. In week 5 of boot camp, branding boot camp, the program I run is dedicated purely to communication. Effective brands know how to communicate well, and the problem is, as lawyers, we leave communication on the sideline because it's hard for us as humans to communicate effectively and communicate from an honest place. Not just honesty, though, but effective communication goes one step beyond that so that everyone's involved. And so I think that is exactly a good example of what effective communication is. Did it land well? Do people feel safe? Do they feel like they can be a contribution? Do they feel taken care of? And can they trust the process and be part of that process? So, Elise, tell me one last question, and I promise I'll let you get back to your very busy life and practice. What's next for you?
Well, that's a really great question. I think one of the big things that I am kind of looking to is developing more classes, or I kind of think of it as downloading my brain in the areas that I have, real expertise, which in the legal profession is, in exceedingly high conflict parenting disputes. And I am working on creating this program for what I call the co-CEOs of Team Child, really trying to help parents learn how to put away their spouse brain and really put on their co-CEO hats and figure out how to maximize their children using each of their strengths, without spending all this time focusing on each other's weaknesses, and really trying to bring value to the legal profession, the family law world in particular, about how can we as professionals work together to help parents do this better, and how can we as professionals do this better. Because I struggle a lot with what I call, the incivility of some attorneys, where the attorneys are communicating so ineffectively and with really vitriolic, mean behavior. And I think that we are not modeling what needs to be modeled. I personally am kind of on a mission to radically disrupt how family law is practiced, both in Seattle, in the country. I think we have a lot of work to do. And I actually see this pandemic as being such a positive impetus for change, because people are not able to rush to court like they have been. And we are having to use alternative dispute and collaborative law and other alternatives to court in that typical win-lose model. And so I'm really trying to use that and use this pandemic in a way to educate my clients, at least, on how can you do this better without relying on the court as your big hammer in the background.
I love it. That is so inspiring. It almost takes my breath away, and honestly. And so that's what I want everyone listening to really get from this conversation. What is in it for you? So stop and consider everything you just heard Elise say, and how can you adapt that to your practice? Every woman lawyer is capable of extreme results, of extremely well handled communication and emotions, and a beautiful brand that will grow your career, whether you're in-house or running a practice the way Elise is. It doesn't have to just be family law. It doesn't mean that that's the practice area that has the most emotions that are impacted. But really, how can you take this lesson and learning and apply it to yourself? And, I always say I like to hang out with big impact people, big impact businesses, because I'm a big impact person. And so every one of you listening has the capability to want to be a big impact person. It's about mindset and actually being a contribution to the world. I know some of you may be thinking, look, I got kids, I got a spouse, now I got daycare issues, and I'm just trying to keep my job. I can't care about the world. I get it. But everyone has the ability to do it in their own ways with their own time. This is not to increase your stress. It's not meant to increase guilt. It's just meant to answer the question, how are you going to be a contribution and serve your purpose in the world? Like Elise is doing, like I'm doing, like so many women lawyers are doing. Why? Because that'll make your life easier. And, I do a lot of research on stress and self-confidence, and I always share it in my free webinars. And, I want to keep this evergreen, this podcast. But if you search on the website, there's always free webinars. We do them once every 6 weeks or so. So you're more than welcome to join those. And I'll talk about the stress and self-confidence in there. But so if you know anything about me, I'm never trying to increase your stress. I'm always trying to reduce your stress. And these tools in your toolbox that Elise and I have been talking about is meant to do that for you. So Elise, any other bit of information you want us to know before I let you go? Do you want to give us the URL for your firm or anything you want us to check out, and any of the listeners here to learn about you?
Well, I think people can just go to EliseBuieFamilyLaw.com and it's Buie, Buie. There's a lot of vowels in my name.
I think I leave off the E regularly, so I apologize.
Oh, no worries.
So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it, Elise. You've been so not just inspirational, which is huge, but pragmatic and effective. And I hope every listener got value. And I thank you all for joining me and listening. And until next time, Katy G out.